Hello, welcome to AT in the IEP. My name is Shauna Montgomery, and I'm an educational consultant with the CAIU in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. My colleague Jerry Schaefer and I have developed the following module as part of the Tier 1 Assistive Technology Process. This process was designed to build capacity in AT within local school districts and cooperating agencies. Each module is designed to provide information about best practice in AT. Let's get started. Throughout this module, you will be asked to stop and complete reflection activities located on the Google form you received with the training. These activities are required for members of our AT teams in order to receive credit for completing each step of the tiered training. When you see this slide during the module, you will be prompted to pause your video and complete the corresponding activity. In this module, we will be looking at how to document AT in an IEP so that the information is clear and the IEP is compliant. We're going to be looking at 5 sections of the IEP: the special considerations, present levels, transition, specially designed instruction, and the supports to school personnel sections to see how AT should be documented in each of these areas. The Special Considerations page of the IEP asks a question as to whether the student needs assistive technology devices and/or services. Oftentimes, teachers are unsure whether they should check yes or whether they should check no to this section. In the following slides, we'll walk through the consideration process and when to check yes and when to check no. According to the law, IDEA states that for every student with an IEP, the team must consider the need for assistive technology. In this situation, consideration means that the IEP team has followed a process to determine whether an action step is required. All action steps must be documented in the IEP, and these steps are going to be different for each student. Every team needs to be talking about and thinking about whether the student receiving the IEP requires assistive technology. When completing the Special Considerations page on the IEP and looking at whether to check the yes or the no box, the first thing that you need to do is check with your district administrator. Each district has different policies or different ways of looking at this, so the best place to start is with your district administrator so you know if there's specific policy or guidance that your district has that you are to follow in doing this. If not, the information that I'm going to share with you now is really considered best practice in this area. So for students who are not using assistive technology and who don't require assistive technology at this time, you would check no in the box. For students who are using assistive technology and it's being successful, then you would check yes. Those are 2 pretty clear-cut scenarios. Number 3 and number 4 is where it gets a little less clear. So for students that are currently using AT, but it's not successful for them, the team is going to need to look into additional information or gather additional data to determine whether AT needs to be part of that student's IEP on a permanent basis. In this case, the team is in the process of considering AT, so you would check the box for yes. Number 4 is related to a student who does not currently have AT, but is being considered for AT. So this is where you might be in the trialing process. You might be collecting data on a variety of tools to determine which one is going to best meet the student's needs. But again, the team is in the process of considering that assistive technology in order to make a decision. So you would also check the yes box. Regardless of which box you check, there should be documentation of the team's consideration of assistive technology somewhere in the present levels to show that the team has talked about it and whatever their decision has been, that there has been data behind that decision. Take a minute and think about the information you just learned. How is it going to impact your current practice? Please pause the video and answer question 1 on the Google form. The present level section of the IEP is where you're going to clarify your AT consideration. The 3 things you want to include in this are skills, data, and support. As far as skills, this is where you're going to clarify and explain the task or the skills that are the target of the AT support. For example, you could be targeting communication, academic skills, mobility, etc. Think about what the functional skills that the student is lacking and that are going to be supported with AT, and describe them and clarify them here. You'll also need to include any data that has been collected as part of the decision to implement or not to implement AT. You need to have data to support whatever the team's decision is, whether they say that the student needs AT or that they do not need AT. The last thing you'll want to include are the type of supports and services that are going to be necessary for the AT tool or device. You want to describe any special features of the device that are needed. So, for example, if you're implementing a communication device, maybe that student can only handle a certain number of options on the screen at one time. That's something that you would want to describe here. If you're using a writing tool as another example, you might describe that the student needs word prediction and speech to text as part of that tool. Keep in mind that this can be low-tech as well. Things like picture schedules, adapted paper, other things like that can also be part of that AT consideration, so make sure that you're describing those things here also. Another section of the IEP that you need to think about when documenting AT is the transition section. Does the student require AT in order to participate in his or her transition activities or services? If the answer is yes, then you need to make sure there is information in the transition section related to the present levels about how the student is going to use the AT. Also, the transition grid should include information to show that it is something that they will require during transition activities in various settings. As an example, if a student is using a communication device and they are going to a work placement where they will need their device, you're going to need to clarify and outline that information here in the transition section. Take a second and think about and brainstorm the type of specific data you could include in the present levels and transition sections of the IEP to help the team make the decision of whether a student requires or does not require AT. Pause the video and complete question 2 of the Google form. The specially designed instruction section is where you can get very specific about the tool itself in order to make sure that the student will be successful with it. The SDI should include a description of the device, as well as any accessories or special circumstances that need to be in place in order for the student to access the device. Notice how these are general descriptions of the items. Districts vary on policies about naming specific devices. Check with your LEA as you're developing the IEP to determine the correct procedure for documenting information in this section. Some examples on the screen, however, are when you're doing the device description, you may want to just put in that it's a communication device with voice output capabilities. So you're kind of just describing the features of the device without naming the specific make or model of the device. When you think about things like specialized accessories, do they need things to go with the device in order to be able to use it? So for example, a student who is using speech to text may also need a headset with a boom microphone. The boom microphone is the one that comes in front of the mouth off of the headset, so that they can use it in a classroom setting where it might be noisy. You also want to specify conditions that are going to be required to use that device, to care for it, or to maintain it. So for example, if a student is using a partner-assisted communication modality, they're going to need an aide to help with that. So that's where you can add that information in the SDI. One other one that I like to point out, because sometimes we don't always think about it, is if we're using a device that requires internet or that's connected via Wi-Fi, we want to make sure that we're specifying that condition in the SDI. Again, when a student has AT listed in their IEP, it has to be consistent, it has to be reliable, it has to be available in the situations that we are specifying it needs to be available. So if we need to make sure that students have consistent and uninterrupted internet access for the device, and that's something that could be questionable, it's best to list that in specially designed instructions so that the people who are responsible for helping that student and supporting that student in the various locations around the school where they'll use that device understand that that's really key to their success with their AT. Here are some additional components in the SDI section that you need to consider when implementing and documenting AT. The first is the frequency of use. How often will the device be in use and will it not be in use? One example I like to give of this is that if you're using a computer software as AT, for example, as a communication device, and the student is also using another software on the same device as a behavioral reinforcement. If you need to remove the behavioral reinforcement, you cannot take away the whole computer, because essentially, if both of those tools are on the same device, you're taking away the student's voice as you remove the behavioral reinforcement on that device. Another consideration is location. Where will the device be used and where will it not be used? Is the student going to need a device to use at home, or are they going to use something else at home? Make sure that you clearly outline that in the SDI. The last thing to think about is the start and end dates. So IEP timelines still apply. When you develop the IEP, you have 10 days from the development date to the implementation date of that IEP. Whatever the implementation date that is listed on the front page of the IEP is the implementation date that the device, tool, or service is expected to be in place. If that's not going to be the case, for example, if you're waiting for a device to arrive, or if there's something going on with the device that you won't be able to use it on the date of implementation of the IEP, you want to be sure you clarify that in the SDI section and change that implementation date so it is clear when the device will be available and start to be used. The key takeaway here is to make sure you pay attention to detail. Think about your district's policy and if they have specific policies related to documenting information on the SDI portion of the IEP. If you're not sure, then try to think about where you could find that information. Please pause the video and complete question 3 of the Google form. The last section of the IEP that we're going to discuss in regards to documenting assistive technology is the Supports to School Personnel section, or SSP. Assistive technology is not just a tool or a device, it can also include a service. And AT services are defined as evaluating the needs for AT, purchasing, leasing, or providing for the acquisition of the tool, selecting, designing, fitting, customizing, adapting the device, coordinating and using the therapies or interventions that are going to support the device, and also training or technical assistance. And this is for the student, for professionals within the school, and also for the student's family. So when you're adding your AT devices into the IEP, make sure that you're planning for time in this school supports to school personnel section so that you have the time available and allocated within support staff's schedules to be able to adequately support this device. So it might look like the speech therapist has time built in to talk to the classroom teacher about how to use a communication device. It may be that the classroom teacher has time built into their schedule to train the parents on how to use a reading and writing software at home so that they can support their students at home. There's lots of different things that come up with the AT services, and again, I would refer you to the annotated IEP at the Patton website for more information. Thank you for taking the time to complete this module. If you have any questions about this module or would like to discuss your role in the AT process, please feel free to email or call us by clicking on or visiting the link on your screen. This is our CAIU Assistive Technology website. Please remember that AT consultants are available for in-person training and consultation with your team.